When an opponent declares, "I will not come over to your side," I calmly say, "Your child belongs to us already. What are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community." Adolf Hitler. I am Doris Wise Montrose, President of Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors. I want to thank our panel participants, Michael Finch and David Horowitz Freedom Center, Larry Sand and the California Teachers Empowerment Center, and the Lux Hotel for making this event possible. I especially want to thank all of you who took the time from your busy schedules to participate in this discussion on the subversion of our public education. For too long, we have failed to pay attention to what the public schools were actually teaching our children. These are the children who then enter our colleges and universities and go on to become citizens, leaders, and voters, the people who mold the world we all live in. The extreme radicalism that has sprung up like weeds on our college campuses did not burst forth in a vacuum. It all first took root in the public schools. The rewriting and erasing of history, the distortion of language, the decay of values that this country used to stand for. Adolf Hitler also said, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." Hitler understood this, and those of us who still know that history know how well he put it to use to realize his vision. And we all know that other famous quote, "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." Tonight is the beginning of the end for that cycle of ignorance. My friend Larry Sand spoke on this issue over 4 years ago when CJHS was still hosting events in my living room. It is Larry's passion that inspired this event and future related events that we have planned. Larry began his teaching career in New York in 1971. Since 1984, he has taught elementary school as well as English, math, history, and ESL in the Los Angeles Unified School District, where he also served as a Title I coordinator. Recently retired, he is the president of the nonprofit California Teachers Empowerment Network, a nonpartisan, non-political group dedicated to providing teachers with reliable and balanced information about professional affiliations and positions on educational issues. Information teachers will often not get from their school districts or unions. Larry's comments and op-eds have appeared in City Journal, Associated Press, Newsweek, Town Hall Magazine, and most other dailies here in California. He also blogs regularly on education and union issues. Larry will introduce our other guests. We have one disappointment in tonight's event. One of our speakers, Mary Grabar, who is coming in from Atlanta, couldn't get here because of the weather. All the flights from Atlanta to LAX were canceled today and yesterday. So we took this as a challenge, worked with Mary, and have come up with a way to give you the presentations she worked so hard to prepare for this evening. Working with the Lux Hotel staff, we will have Mary on speaker. There she is. To listen in on the event and to participate in the Q&A by telephone. We have prepared a pamphlet for each of you with prescriptions by our speakers for citizen action. We will also have this posted on our website along with the video of tonight's event. Now I present to you Larry Sand.
Thanks, Doris. Just before I forget, lest I probably wouldn't forget, but I would just like to thank Doris, who puts on many wonderful events, and hopefully this will be one of them. And Michael Finch from the David Horowitz Freedom Center. This is really Anyway, the question I get so often is, why should I care? My kid graduated from school. Why should I care? My grandkid graduated. I don't have any kids. My kid's in private school. Why should I care? The answer is very simply, if your stateroom is in the back of the Titanic, and you have a wonderful stateroom and you're very comfortable, the Titanic hits the iceberg, What is going on in your stateroom doesn't matter. You are going down with the ship. Okay? This is America right now. If public education fails, we are all going down. Good people may disagree about what the most important events of the day are. Clearly there are many. Healthcare, the economy, Islam. What's the most important? I say it's education. Because of the poorly educated electorate, we're doomed because people will not understand any of those issues. They will vote on ignorance. This is what we're facing. The situation in California is something, shall we say, dire. Some statistics from a few years ago, which I just checked before with Mr. Izumi, because these statistics I first read about in something written by the Research Institute, Vicky Murray. 30% of the students in the UC system, our formerly vaunted UC system, UCLA, UC Davis, 30% need remediation going in. 30%. That number goes up to 60% in the Cal State system, Cal State LA, Cal State Northridge, Cal State Dominguez Hills. And an unbelievable 90% of students who go into the California community colleges need remediation. That means they're not ready for college. That means the K through 12 schools are not doing their job. 41% of those students drop out before getting out of college. Who pays for this? We all do. Everybody does. So it's a drain on the economy. Then we have something in California called the California High School Exit Exam, which every student is supposed to pass before they get out of high school. The problem is, it's a dumb test. It tests 8th, 9th, and 10th, some 10th grade skills. This is a high school exit exam. So it's does high school end at the end of 9th grade? No, it goes on to 12th grade. Not only that, but I was talking to Lance earlier about this, and what you tell me is 55, you only have to get 55% of math?
That's correct.
So you're going to get out of high school maybe with 55% on a 9th grade test, and you're supposed to be ready for college? This is a joke. The K through 12 schools are not doing their job. Then we have the problem, and we're talking about bad education, now we're talking about miseducation, which is slightly different, or as we phrased it here for tonight, the subversive agenda of public education. Does anybody here know what November 20th is? It's a holiday that is celebrated in at least some schools, and maybe many schools. Does anybody know? November 20th. You're in December, but it's called the Transgender Day of Remembrance. I'm not making it up. Go home and Google it. Got a BlackBerry? No, I'm turning BlackBerries now. Go home and Google it. Seriously. November 11th is basically ignored, which is, of course, is Veterans Day. I used to dutifully get on the PA every Veterans Day, talk about veterans, why they're important. I didn't do it to self-aggrandize. I'm not telling you this to make me look good. I'm just questioning why nobody else did this. And then my last year, 2009, I got a couple minutes. The Transgender Day of Remembrance got a lot more time than I did. And now that I'm gone to my school, I retired in 2009. I'll bet kids in my school know, in that school where I used to teach, know a lot more about Transgender Day than they do about Veterans Day. Same thing at the end of May. I did the same thing for Memorial Day, talked about it, why we should be thankful, why we should show gratitude and feel good that we live in a country where people died for us. And that's where I get on the PA, same thing, do my 2 minutes. The Friday before Memorial Day at my school was also known as Multicultural Day. They held this huge multicultural festival every year. I'll spare you that because if I start talking about it, I won't stop for an hour. It was really Radical Agenda Day. My last year, to use a vernacular of the day, I liberated this sign from the wall of my school. It says, "The true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love," written by that very well-known love man, Che Guevara. Now, At least 5 teachers in my school had big pictures of Che Grabar on their wall. I'm not talking about Cuban history class, I'm talking about math and music. The teachers thought he was a good guy, the kids think he's a good guy, and nobody tells these kids that Che Guevara was a mass murderer, and a sadistic one at that. This is what I mean about miseducation. This is miseducation at its finest. Anyway, enough patent talk from me. We're going to need Evan Sage to come up here and do a little comedy about halfway through it. Anyway, we have a very distinguished panel tonight. As Doris mentioned, Mira cannot be with us, although she sits here in this little box. Partly her fault. The weather in Atlanta, as some of you know, is abysmal, and she just literally couldn't get out the last few days. But we'll be talking about unions, textbooks, Islam, and general culture. Each speaker, we've asked them to limit themselves to 15 minutes. I know it's going to be tough because each one of these subjects will probably fill hours. They're going to do 15 minutes each, and then, because we're going to leave time for some Q&A after the fact. Okay? First up is Lance Izumi. And let me just read a little bit about Lance. Lance Izumi is a Correct Senior Fellow and Senior Director of Education Studies at the Pacific Research Institute. He is the co-author of the groundbreaking book, Not As Good As You Think, Why the Middle Class Needs School Choice, and co-executive producer of the award-winning 2009 PBS broadcast film documentary, Not As Good As You Think, The Myth of the Middle Class School. He also appears in Academy Award-winning director Davis Guggenheim's 2010 acclaimed film documentary, Waiting for Superman. In 2008, the New York Times selected Lance Izumi as one of its online contributors on the presidential race and education issues. In 2009, the New York Times posted Sweden's Choice, a short film on Sweden's universal school choice voucher system, which he wrote and narrated. He is also co-author of the book Free to Learn, Lessons from Model Charter Schools, which was used as a guidebook for creating high-performing charter schools in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Mr. Izumi is a member and former 2-term president of the Board of Governors of the California Community Colleges. Mr. Izumi served as chief speechwriter and director of writing and research for California Governor George McManchin. He also served in the administration of President Ronald Reagan as speechwriter to United States Attorney General Edwin Meese III. Lance Izumi.
Thank you very much, Larry, for that very generous introduction. I also want to add my thanks very much to Doris and to the children of Jewish Holocaust survivors, Larry and the California Teacher Empowerment Network, and David Horowitz's Freedom Center for sponsoring tonight's event. And I want to thank all of you for coming out on a Tuesday evening and to be with us all here today. As Larry mentioned, I spent some of my earlier life as a political speechwriter. For those of you who remember George McManchin, I was the one who gave him all that charisma. I always say that behind every great man is a little Japanese guy at the keyboard. I was talking with some of your audience members here in the front row, and one of our attendees here was giving me some little benign criticism for not understanding the Japanese language. To which I replied that actually underneath this Japanese exterior, I'm actually a 6-foot red-bearded Scotsman. And I gave her a proof because I got married in Scotland in an 18th century castle in a kilt. But don't ask me if I wore a traditional Scottish wrap. Anyway, again, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. As Larry mentioned earlier in his introductory remarks, there's a lot of bad news in education here in California, as well as in the United States, but especially here in California. But I think that one of the things that is important for all of us to remember is that it's not just bad news for some people, right? I think that if you watch the news, if you watch, listen to politicians, you get that feeling that, yes, there is an education problem here, there's a learning problem, there's a teaching problem, but it's only happening, let's say, in poor urban areas, poor rural areas, out in the country, out of sight, out of mind, right? But actually, a lot of the schools, are actually a lot better than people think they are. Well, as Larry mentioned in some of my work says, no, they're not as good as you think they are. And just to give you an example, I mean, Larry now mentioned some of those statistics about remediation at the Cal State, University of California. Okay, it's not just poor kids from Watts and East LA who are going to UC and CSU that are accounting for those statistics, right? Think about this, is that Governor Brown just nominated for the State Board of Education the former principal of Malibu High School. Okay, now Malibu High School is in a zip code which has a median home price of $1.5 million, right? So very affluent area. Well, what are the test scores like at Malibu High School? Well, if you look at this latest 2010 scores, you'll find out that 70% of 11th graders at Malibu High School are not proficient in math, based upon the state standardized test. 7 out of 10 kids in the 11th grade at Malibu High School are not proficient in mathematics. Okay, so now, therefore, how are they going to do in college? Well, it's not surprising to find out that when these kids take the California State University's early assessment program, and that's an important test to remember. You'll hear about the state standardized test and the K-12 level. But one of the tests that we should really look at when we judge the performance of our public schools is this thing called the EAP, the Early Assessment Program, which is a test put out by the California State University system for 11th graders across California. And on that EAP, 3/4 of 11th graders at Malibu High School tested not ready for college-ready English. All right? So 3/4 of those kids not ready for college-level English. Well, that's not an isolated instance. It's not just maybe some slacker, rich kids at Malibu High School. When we look at schools across California, we found so many schools in middle class and affluent areas across California, hundreds and hundreds of schools, from not only Malibu, but from Orange County to the Silicon Valley to Santa Barbara to San Diego, all these places, the Bay Area, all these areas where you think they would have some really good schools, they weren't so good after all. And we started to ask, well, why is that? Why are the schools so bad in these areas that should be producing really good results? Well, we thought, well, maybe one of the reasons is because, let's look at teacher union contracts. Because one of the things that we do know for sure, based upon research, is that one of the biggest factors in determining the quality of education for a kid in the classroom is the quality of that teacher in the front of the class. So let's look at the union contracts in some of these suburban, red county areas, and see, what are they like? We all know that things are bad in LA Unified, right? That's no news. Okay? So like beating on them anymore is like beating a dead horse. But let's look at a place like Rancho Cucamonga. Now, Rancho Cucamonga, which is out in the Inland Empire area, for those of you who are geographically challenged, like myself, people like me. When I did this, I sad to say, when I did this book, I had to actually look up like where the heck most of these schools were. But actually, so Rancho Cucamonga is in the Inland Empire, actually represented for many years by Jim Brulty, who was the longtime leader of the Republicans in the state Senate. It's a very red area. So a place where you might think that, well, okay, conservative probably has a better teacher union contract than LA Unified, right? Well, let's look at it. Here's the union contract for that area. And you know what you find out? You find out a lot of interesting things. You remember how just a few months ago there was a big brouhaha here in Los Angeles about the Los Angeles Times not publishing the test results and the teacher names, linking how students are doing in each individual classroom all across the LA Unified District, right? And you remember how the United Teachers of Los Angeles, had a conviction and went and protested the LA Times building, etc., right? But was that an isolated incident, right? No. Because you look at this contract here for the Chaffee School District, which includes Rancho Cucamonga, and you find out that here in black and white, in their section on evaluation, right? What goes into evaluation of a teacher? Well, I can tell you one thing, things that don't go in there. The evaluation of unit members shall not include or be based upon the following: any standardized or other district test results that measure achievement. Pretty black and white there. Can't use any test results. Oh, results of any test utilized for the purpose of the school's improvement plan. Oh, trying to improve the school, can't use any of those results. The success or lack thereof of the site of the school to meet the required growth targets in the standardized test. Can't use assessments or recommendations of the scholastic audit team, which is often assigned to look at schools' performance, as a result of program improvement, corrective action, or restructuring, or other identified teams such as the school assistance or intervention teams. You can't use any of that stuff to evaluate the teachers. What can you use? So what you can use is an observation. You can look at a teacher, all right, and you go into the classroom, watch that teacher, and see whether they're doing a good job teaching the kids, right? What you can do, according to the contract, is you can judge them on how they support all students in learning, how they create and maintain an effective environment for student learning, how they plan instruction, how they assess student learning. Interesting how they assess student learning, but not about the results, right? You can assess, but the results don't mean anything, because you can't use the results to see whether the teacher is actually doing a good job, But that evaluation of the teacher occurs in this observation for a teacher with tenure once every other year. And it's a one-time observation. So a teacher with, let's say, 30 years could actually probably have 15 observations in his entire career. What can't be used in addition to test scores? Something called classroom walkthroughs. Right? What's a classroom walkthrough? You're the principal. You hear that Mr. So-and-so is doing a very bad job teaching math in room 102. So you decide, okay, I'm going to go and see what Mr. So-and-so is doing when he teaches math. You can't do that. Because you have to tell that teacher that you're coming. All right? And if you, the principal, are the person who is evaluating that teacher in that once every other year scenario, you can't go. You have to send the vice principal to go and look. And who then tells you, oh, and by the way, that walkthrough is limited to 4 minutes or less. You can, and here it is. The CWT shall last 4 minutes or less in a classroom. So, now, the lady here says, what are they hiding? Well, evidently a lot. So what if the off chance that the teacher is found in that form? Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you that whatever you see in that 4 minutes can't be used in the evaluation. So, you have to wait maybe till next year when the official evaluation observation occurs. All right, well, what if you actually ended up having an observation of that teacher, which actually seemed like they weren't doing a good job, even in that one brief time you saw them? Well, that teacher is not fired, for example, or docked or anything like that. They go to what's called performance review or peer review. Right? Peer review. What does that mean in the Chaffee district? Well, you look under peer review here, and that means that the teacher is reviewed by a panel. Who's on the panel? There are 3 administrators. Oh, there are 4 members who are appointed by the union. All right, 7 members, 4 appointed by the union, 3 administrators. Oh, wait. The 4 members appointed by the union include the union president and the union vice president. And all votes are by majority vote. So the joint panel appoints the consulting teacher who is supposed to mentor the teacher who is having a problem. Oh, but then that joint panel also evaluates the effectiveness of that consulting teacher and the program. Do you get the idea that the fix is in? Well, anyway, I could go on and on with this thing, but you get the idea with that. Well, you know, the problem is not just that there are these process issues here in terms of the unions, right? There are lots of other problems that the unions cause in these contracts. I mean, there are the real curriculum and pedagogy issues that make their way into union contracts. It's not just about wages, salaries, discipline, grievances, all that sort of thing. A union contract includes an incredible amount of stuff that have to do basically with how kids are taught and how kids are supposed to learn. One of the new frontiers in education is this issue of technology in the classroom. I mean, look, we've got virtual Mary here with us on the conference call listening to this. Well, in the classroom, now you can have online classes, distance learning. You can have lots of different technology-aided courses that allow you to teach better, to make it more effective, more efficient, more cost-effective. All right? And you would think that this would be something that would be embraced by a place like California, which is the home to Silicon Valley, of all places. California would be the home to this revolution. And, we just put out a book called Short-Circuited, The Challenges Facing the Online Learning Revolution in California, which actually just came out today. So I'm happy to say that I said, send me the books. I'm giving a speech tonight to all of you, and I need a copy of it to show everybody. So anyway, here it is. And the interesting thing is there's success stories in here, all right, that we document. For example, there's a charter school up in San Jose called the Rocket Ship Charter School, which services kids in a low-income Hispanic neighborhood, many of them immigrants, and yet, and they also make great use of computer technology. In fact, about a quarter of their learning day is devoted to a computer lab. And you know what that means? Because they're non-union, is that they don't have to hire as many teachers. And so that school, instead of hiring 4 teachers, has to only hire 3. They end up having a surplus of $500,000 a year while the district is going broke. Right? Yes. But see, the thing is, it's not just the saving the money, but that it should be really important in a time like we have right now, where Governor Brown and the legislature are all crying about the deficit that Sacramento has caused, right? Shouldn't we be looking at models like this that save a lot of money and also end up improving performance? And in fact, improving performance so much at this school that these kids in this low-income Hispanic neighborhood in San Jose are outperforming some of the highest performing schools in Palo Alto next to Stanford University. Okay? And the thing that they want to do is replicate these schools across California. I have with me one of my co-authors of the book, Evelyn Stacy, who's there in the second row, and she and I interviewed Evelyn, stand up. And so she and I interviewed the principal, the chief academic officer over at Rocket Ship, and he gave us a lot of this information. But, he did tell us that, of course, that, they have problems with the unions. And what would the unions have against this type of thing, right? Something that really, shows a great deal of promise, makes use of that innovation we're all talking about, that we need to use to improve student learning, right? What would they have against that? Well, a lot, because didn't I just say that for every 4 teachers in a regular school, there are only 3 in Rocket Ship? Which is why the California Federation of Teachers, the second largest state union in the state, issued this: the framework for contract negotiations related to education technology issues. All right? And so, what do they say? This is the model contract they suggest is used at both higher education, the community colleges, and in K-12 schools. All right? And so, well, first of all, they make the claim saying that, you know, learning takes place best in the traditional setting where kids and teachers can get together, you know, and be kind of this community, etc., right? Well, is that really true? Because it's worked so well based on the statistics that Larry and I just said, right? You know, where's that performance that they're talking about? Right? The other thing, too, is that look at what's happened with some of these schools like Rocket Ship. They're evidently doing a lot, you know, with technology, and it doesn't require that kind of traditional setting that they're talking about. But, you know, the union, the promoters of the new, say that courses taught with the use of technology may be included in a faculty member's workload only with his or her consent. No faculty member shall be required to teach a course using distance learning technology. No faculty member shall be sanctioned for declining to a course taught primarily using educational technologies. So you can be a Luddite and never be penalized. Now, the union is extremely worried that these education technologies, because they're successful, will be used by the districts in contracting out to companies to provide services for the district. So the union says contracting out bargaining unit work can take the form of a district contracting with an independent contractor to produce course software. A district could contract with a company to produce certain course offerings, or could offer courses over the internet that had not been developed in-house. And here's the important line. In each case, someone else is doing the bargaining unit's work. Right? Even if they're not doing a good job, they're doing the union's work, and they don't like that. So what does the union say? The model contract language says, no employee shall be displaced because of distance learning or other educational technology. The use of distance education technology shall not be used to reduce, eliminate, or consolidate faculty positions within the district. Courses traditionally taught by bargaining unit members are courses for which they meet the minimum qualifications that lie within the curricular purview of the course will not be awarded to other institutions for transmission into the campus by electronic means, which means that if you have minimum qualifications, as opposed to being a star teacher, you know, in another state who could, you know, be used to teach kids here in California, well, you can't do that. So, you know, the point of this all is that not only are the unions strong because we all know of the amount of money they give up in Sacramento, they're the largest, you know, spending lobby in the state capitol, but they also have this incredible effect on what goes on in the classroom beyond just the accountability and discipline issues that we often hear about. You know, they're preventing that type of educational models that are succeeding in other places from coming into the classroom. And so therefore, you know, what we have to do is to take a very broad view of this, and it's happening not just in certain areas, it's happening all over California. So we have to take a very broad view about, you know, this problem, and not say it's just in somebody else's backyard. Watch Waiting for Superman. All right? For those of you who have seen that movie, David Guggenheim specifically made sure that he didn't just use poor kids in that movie. He made sure to use white, middle-class kids as well, because they are also impacted by these processes. So, you know, I commend all of that to your thinking. You can look at my recommendations. You know, we can get into that in the Q&A. Sorry I took longer than I should, Larry, but, you know, thanks so much for having me.
Next up is Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and the author of 10 books, including the New York Times bestsellers, The Truth About Muhammad, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades, He is co-author with Pamela Geller of The Post-American Presidency, the Obama Administration's War in America, Threshold Edition, Simon & Schuster. Spencer is a weekly columnist for Human Events and Front Page Magazine. He has led seminars on Islam and Jihad for the United States Central Command, the United States Army Command and General Staff College, the U.S. Army's Asymmetric Warfare Group, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the U.S. Intelligence Community. Robert Spencer.
thanks very much. Thank you so much for coming. We're hearing such cheerful news tonight, and I've got more. The dominant ethos, of course, in the educational system in the public schools is multiculturalism, and that is broadly defined the principle that all cultures should be treated equally and there should not be Western bias toward Judeo-Christian civilization in public school material. But functionally, of course, as I'm sure you all know already, that is an ethos that leads to a marked anti-Western bias. All cultures are good except ours. And all cultures should be given a positive and benign treatment except our own. Now, that is something that Islamic groups have taken very canny advantage of. And it is remarkable, really, what we've been hearing tonight about how the negative views of American history are being presented in public schools, how that coalesces with the negative views of the United States and the West and Judeo-Christian civilization in general that are coming out of the Islamic world and are being pushed into public school textbooks by Islamic groups today in the United States. And the multiculturalist publishers of public school textbooks are only too happy to work with these Islamic groups in order to put this point of view into the textbooks, because of course it meshes with their own so nicely. And so the situation in particular that we have comes from a group in particular called the Council on Islamic Education, CIE. The Council on Islamic Education is a consulting group that deals with American textbook publishers, and at their own invitation and their happy cooperation, it vets their material on world history and on world religions. And the results are textbooks, again and again, that present a negative view of Western civilization, a negative view of Judaism and Christianity, a critical view, I should say, of Judaism and Christianity, and then a whitewashed, partial, confected, and wholly positive view of Islam that is very misleading and can ultimately be dangerously so in light of the threat that we face from Islamic jihadists around the world today and in the United States, because it leaves the people who learn only from these textbooks with a complete ignorance and misunderstanding of what it is exactly that we're up against. And one of the most insidious things about these textbooks, and this is not just one book I'm talking about, or two or five, this is something that it's really quite shocking. I have found in pretty much every public school textbook that I've come across in this, a huge number of them, they are compelling students to make statements of Islamic faith in order to get the right answer on tests and be judged to have, by these sterling teachers we're hearing about, be judged to have mastered the material. In other words, it's like this. There are, in textbook after textbook, when it comes to statements about Christianity, the textbooks will say, quite properly, that Christians believe that Jesus Christ was the Messiah and died and rose from the dead 3 days after he died, and thus validated the truth of his identity and his mission. Christians believe that. In other words, that is a statement of religious faith that if you're not a Christian, you would not accept as factual. Perfectly fine. Then flip over a few pages to Islam and Muhammad in the world history book, and it will say, Muhammad was the apostle of God and received the Quran from the angel Gabriel. I'm seriously, I'm not making this up. And they put this forth as if this is something that actually happened. It does not say Muslims believe that Muhammad was the apostle of God and received the Quran from the angel, through the angel Gabriel. And so, in the test material that comes in supplementary workbooks and so on, there are true-false questions that will say, Muhammad was the apostle of God. True or false? And so you have to get the right answer you have to say true, and you're making an affirmation of the Islamic faith. This is no accident. The Council on Islamic Education and other groups like it that vet these school textbooks, they did this on purpose. And they have fashioned this kind of material in order to put our students into that kind of situation so that they will get these ideas into their mind, not only that Islam is benign and has nothing about it whatsoever that anybody needs to be concerned about in the United States today, but also that it's something that has a greater claim to truth and to reliability than to traditions that have formed Western civilization. And consequently, somebody would be better advised, more rightly guided, one could say, to accept Islam. The Byron Union School District, which is somewhere here in California, was using this workbook, one of these workbooks, a few years back. And I was an expert witness in the case that was brought by some of the parents who sued the school district to say that their children were being compelled to affirm Islam as true in order to go through this material. And it was worse than just these insidious, slyly worded test questions. The students were also, in the course of this unit on world history unit on Islam and the Islamic world, they were made to memorize Muslim prayers and had to recite the prayers to the teacher. Now imagine what would have happened if you had heard about students in a public school being forced to memorize Christian prayers. Obviously, the ACLU would have been right on the case, and the separation of church and state reaffirmed, and everything would have been all right, right? But in this case, the ACLU was, I guess they were busy with their joint operations with the Council on American Islamic Relations, and they weren't able to make it. And so these parents brought suit, and we took this case to court and said, look, you have these students memorizing Muslim prayers. Some of the supplemental material, the optional material, had them coming to the school in Muslim garb and making a prayer rug with construction paper and crayons in high school, of course. Presumably, I guess, then prostrating themselves on their prayer rug and reciting their memorized prayer. But in any case, the judge ruled that this was a legitimate pedagogical exercise that was sort of play acting, you know, a pedagogical tool to reinforce these various concepts that was perfectly legitimate. And so the parents lost the case. But here again, imagine if in play acting about learning about Catholic Europe that students had been dressed in monks' robes and celebrating the Eucharist in class. Unlikely that the judge would have taken that benign view. I think inconceivable. The material also about Islam and jihad, I have a little bit of it here, Holt's Medieval to Early Modern Times, which is a high school textbook, defines jihad as the inner struggle people go through in their effort to obey God and behave according to Islamic ways. Muhammad is said to be somebody who taught equality and to share the wealth and to care for the less fortunate in society. They didn't mention, of course, that the way he taught to share the wealth was to go and kill the people who owned it, take the wealth, and share it among the followers, among his followers, which is, of course, it's historically documentable from the earliest Islamic sources that Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, fought 78 battles, 77 were offensive, that he has instructions in the Quran about what to do with the booty, the spoils of war, that are captured in these battles, and he always gets a fifth. And jihad is the rubric under which these kinds of raids were carried out, and still are, obviously. Faisal Shahzad, the Times Square bomber, who tried to murder thousands of people in a crowded Saturday night in Times Square when everybody was out, he made a video, which you can readily see online, in which he explained that he was waging jihad and obeying the dictates of the Quran and Muhammad. And this, of course, is something that happens again and again and again. This is not something that he originated. The Seattle bomber was the same with Portland, Oregon bomber, excuse me, and the Baltimore bomber. I don't know if you've heard about all these bombers, but there have been a lot of jihad plots in the United States lately, and they all come back to these concepts within Islam that I would suggest to you would be wise for students to learn about, that it would be good for public schools to be teaching that there is a group of Muslims, if not all Muslims certainly, but certainly a deeply embedded tradition within Islam, and a large group of Muslims in the United States as well as around the world who believe that it's part of their responsibility as believers in this religion to wage war against unbelievers and to subjugate them, and that they are obeying, as far as they understand it, the teachings of Muhammad and the Quran. When you meet this Gandhi-like Muhammad in these public school textbooks, well, in the first place, obviously, yes, he's fictional, but it also has the effect of rendering these students entirely defenseless and unprepared for the challenge that they face when they go out into the real world and they see that there are these Muslims who are doing this and acting in the name of Islam, committing acts of violence. But also, more insidiously, they are completely unprepared for the societal and cultural initiatives of which these textbooks are a part. The societal and cultural initiatives, which I wrote about in the book Stealth Jihad in 2008, to insinuate elements of Islamic law into the West, and to demand that Muslims must be accommodated. And so, we see this all over the country nowadays with efforts to compel workplaces, businesses, public institutions to make special accommodation for Islamic practices, and to reinforce the principle that wherever Islamic law and American law conflict, then it's American law that has to give way. This is a widespread initiative that is going on under the rubric of civil rights and freedom of religion, when actually it is an attempt to create a special status for Muslims, which is in accord with Islamic law vis-a-vis Muslims and non-Muslims. So, for example, we have in this is a very small example, but it's an emblematic one. In the Swift meatpacking plants in Nebraska and Colorado now, after the EEOC stepped in and after there were some angry confrontations and work stoppages and so on, now Muslims have special break times in those plants that the other employees are not entitled to. And the other employees have to work longer hours to accommodate these special break times for the Muslims so they can pray at the specified times during the day. It was the non-Muslims in these plants who protested against this because they said that you're not treating all the employees equally. We do have the principle of equality of treatment, equality of access, and equality of rights in the United States, and you're transgressing against that. This is the kind of thing that these textbooks are designed to bring about by making students in the first place hate their own culture and their own country, as we just heard about. Be ashamed of who we are and where we have come from. And then to see this other culture that is actively at war with our own, at least in part, as something that is benign, positive, and never to be resisted or questioned. And the upshot, of course, is then the advance of Islamic law in the United States and the advance of the special status for Muslims. The Muslim Brotherhood, which is the parent organization of virtually every Islamic group in the United States, including several of these groups that are vetting these textbooks, according to a captured internal document that was released a few years back, is dedicated in its own words to eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands, that is, the brothers' hands, and the hands of the believers in general, so that it falls and Allah's religion is victorious over other religions. That is not just a statement of religious triumphalism, but a political statement. Because the religion that they are speaking about has an intrinsic and essential political and supremacist aspect. The assault on America's textbooks and the insidious and very clever use of the multiculturalist ethos by these Islamic groups in order to put forward this point of view is all in service of that agenda. And so obviously we can discuss this more, but the main thing that we need to do is to shed light on this issue, to call upon the textbook manufacturers to stop allowing these Islamic groups to have any control over the content of the textbooks in the United States, and to call upon them to both reflect our own culture and civilization accurately and to reflect Islamic culture and civilization accurately. And this is something that is in the hands of all of us to do. It's up to us. There is nobody else who is going to do this. And so this is an effort that we have to undertake now. Thank you.
Again, what Robert just said about it's up to us. It is. Okay, as Doris mentioned earlier, Mary Grabar could not be here tonight because of horrible weather in Atlanta. She has been sitting here on the phone. Mary, you there?
I am here.
Okay. So the emergency plan was for me to read what she was going to say and use her PowerPoint. But we're actually going to try to have her speaking to you right now. Okay? Let me just read the bio and then Mary, it's yours.
Okay.
Okay. Mary Grabar earned her PhD in English from the University of Georgia in 2002 and has since then taught at a number of Atlanta area colleges and universities. She currently teaches in the program of Democracy and Citizenship at Emory University. She writes about education, culture, and politics for Pajamas Media, Front Page, Town Hall, Minding the Campus, The Weekly Standard, and other publications and sites. She has prepared in-depth reports on education conferences and on Bel Airs and Howard Zinn for America's Survival, and has participated in that organization's conferences in Washington. Mary was born in Slovenia and then communist Yugoslavia and grew up in Rochester, New York. She now lives in the Atlanta area. So Mary, you ready?
I'm ready. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Can you all hear?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me. Hello, everybody. Sorry I can't be there in person. But as I'm stuck in what feels like the tundra in Atlanta, Georgia, please know that I would much rather have been with you in Los Angeles and to have the satisfaction of making yet one more joke about Al Gore and global warming. But I am thankful to Al Gore because he invented the internet so that I could send you this PowerPoint. Thank you. We find ourselves here on January 11th, 2011 on a very cold day, here at least in Atlanta, between two holidays that have taken on a new significance. We've just celebrated our, quote, winter holiday that began with Black Friday, that this year began on Black Thursday, once known as Thanksgiving. Next week, we will celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. It's not that I'm opposed to the King holiday or to special sales attached to holidays, but what has been happening with such holidays is the encroachment of the state, especially in our schools, where their original meaning is altered to fit into state guidelines. As a child, I remember singing Silent Night and the Dreidel song during Christmas time. But when I attended a winter concert at a public school here in Atlanta last month, not only did I not hear any of these songs, but I did not even hear Frosty the Snowman or Jingle Bells. So why should we even care if school children do not learn these songs or see holiday symbols like the Easter Bunny, a manger scene, or a dreidel? First, the celebration of holidays implants in students' minds the idea that religion is important in American life. They must understand how important religion is to maintaining our republic. Someone who understood this was Alexis de Tocqueville, who traveled across the young nation in 1831. He wrote that in Democracy in America, religion in America takes no direct part in the government of society, but it must be regarded as the first of their political institutions. So although religion did not take the form of an established church, it was an essential part of the republic. He wrote, "In the United States, the influence of religion is not confined to the manners, but it extends to the intelligence of the people." Tocqueville understood that religious belief forms character and values. He also understood how it checks the plans of dangerous ideologues. He also wrote, "If the minds of the Americans were free from all hindrances, they would shortly become the most daring innovators and the most persistent disputants in the world. But the revolutionists of America are obliged to profess an ostensible respect for Christian morality and equity, which does not permit them to violate wantonly the laws that oppose their designs, nor would they find it easy to surmount scruples of their partisans, even if they were able to get over their own. Hitherto, no one in the United States has dared to advance the maxim that everything is permissible for the interests of society, an impious adage which seems to have been invented in an age of freedom to shelter all future tyrants. In other words, even the societal pressure to profess an ostensible respect for religion serves as a safeguard." The outcome of the American Revolution was quite different from the outcome of the atheistic French Revolution and other similar atheistic revolutions, as we can see by this visual. In fact, Tocqueville wrote, "Religion is more needed in a democratic republic than in any others." We can apply this observation to the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century that also sought to eliminate religious and other traditions. Alarmed by the rise of totalitarian regimes of National Socialism and international communism, a number of intellectuals attempted explanation. An intellectual movement arose after World War II to analyze the total state or totalitarianism. One such scholar was Robert Nisbet, who wrote in his 1953 book, The Quest for Community, that the total state recognizes in human personality certain basic needs for security and recognition and strives through every art and technique to satisfy those needs in calculated political terms. Nisbet, like others, saw Jean-Jacques Rousseau as the intellectual father of totalitarianism through his idea of the popular or general will. He said Rousseau was the first of modern philosophers to see in the state a means of resolving the conflicts not merely among institutions, but within the individual himself. The state promises to fulfill the personal, spiritual, and cultural needs of the individual. Nisbet also wrote, "The total state seeks to eliminate from culture all of those ceremonial, ritualistic, or symbolic features inherited from the past that constitute by their existence obstructions to the achievement of a perfect mobilization of popular will." The total state sees such symbols as a threat to its power. The total state outlaws superfluous or irrelevant forms of recreation and creates new ceremonies and symbols. This is Nisbet again. These posters are sold to teachers on a site that offers multicultural curriculum materials. Che Guevara replaces George Washington. We have a Kwanzaa image. And an Earth Day poster. The total state invents and promotes new holidays like Kwanzaa and Earth Day. This is from Georgia Perimeter College's page for the Martin Luther King Day observance. This holiday in particular is being used in schools to promote a certain ideological view. The first recommended day of service activity on this site was volunteering to clean up a dog park. The activities at the community college are part of a federal effort. This screenshot is from the federal government's website. But we should ask, how much of a day of service is it if the government is directing it? Many high schools now require community service projects. These are pre-selected and aimed for certain charities and activities. This is a screenshot from the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, a group that seems intent on installing the total state. Excuse me. Not only do such groups intimidate schools regarding religious displays, but they now seem to have a beef with the Constitution. They interfere with local control and the selection of textbooks. They sue schools that hold graduations in church halls. They are now threatening schools in the Atlanta area who use these church halls because of the limited space in their own schools. This group aids in the transformation of our country into a cultureless, atheistic regime. When citizens lose their culture and religion, they turn to the state to fulfill more and more of their needs. They become dependent wards of the state. In the chapter, What Sort of Despotism Democratic Nations Have to Fear, Temple contrasts the tyranny of an emperor who is supreme arbiter in all matters, yet the details of social life and private occupations lay, for the most part, beyond his control. This is the despotism of the total state. He predicted a new kind of despotism among democratic nations. It would be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. It would interfere with private interests and be a soft despotism, a soft tyranny. This is a photo of 13-year-old Cody Alicia of California who dared to resist state power as represented by his principal, who told him that he could not display the symbol of his country, the American flag, on school grounds. Cody, I was that, knew that he was defying the school orthodoxy. If he goes to a typical school, he is taught not only to be more appreciative of other culture, but he is emotionally pressured to refrain from expressing any pride in his own heritage. In today's school climate, displaying the American flag is a statement of opposition against state authority, one that now promotes a one-world government. As we replace traditional names associated with religion, customs, and nationalities, we cede power to the state. The state today would have students be global citizens. The state's representatives in the classroom teach peace studies and conflict resolution towards this end. So will this be the new flag? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Anyway, next up is Dr. David Upham. He's an attorney and assistant professor of politics at the University of Dallas. He received his JD from the University of Texas and his PhD in politics from the University of Dallas. Excuse me. His teaching and research focus on American political thought and American constitutional history. His current projects focus on the status and privileges of citizenship under the Constitution. In addition, Upham currently works as Of counsel, excuse me, in the law firm of Fanning, Harper, Markinson, Brandt, and Kuchin, where he specializes in defending local governments in constitutional and administrative litigation. Previously, Dr. Upham was an associate attorney in the law firm of Jones Day and has taught history and other social studies to junior and senior high school students in Texas and the Northern Marianas Islands. David Upham.
Good evening, everyone, and I want to thank all the organizers for this event and for inviting me. It is truly a pleasure, in the sensory sense, to be in California. I left Texas this morning, and it was 19 degrees, and we have warm days in Texas in summer, but we also get the wind come sweeping down the plains, and it can get very cold. I suppose that's some consolation to those of you who looked at the results of the last election and thought that maybe Texas was going in the right direction relative to California. But you still have the beauty, the weather, just fantastic things here, so that's certainly more than some consolation. See, in most public schools, and most public school textbooks, is a very different approach. The American founding is fundamentally racist, fundamentally pro-slavery. Whatever good can be found in the American founding is its radical aspect. So, for instance, the book called American Pageant, one of the most widely used textbooks, authored by history professors at Stanford University. Probably the most, it wouldn't surprise me if it's the most widely used in California public schools. Speaks about the American Revolution, when speaking about the good thing as being sort of radical or liberal, and it speaks about the Tories as, quote, conservatives. I could speak at length about why the American whigs and revolutionaries actually thought of themselves as the true conservatives, but that would take a while to develop that. Similarly, on the question of slavery, the book The American Pageant will say, in quoting Roger Taney's claims in the Dred Scott case, that the American founders thought slavery was fine, and they never thought that an African American had any rights which a white man was bound to respect. And they say, well, of course, Roger Taney was right about history. I always look for these things in the textbook. The textbook never mentioned the descent of Justice Curtis, which completely destroys Justice Taney's claims. It never mentions the fact that Abraham Lincoln and most of the North thought that Taney was completely wrong, ethically, with lots of evidence that the American founders were very ambivalent about slavery, and the issue was much more complex. And that most of the American founders, including the most prominent slaveholders, said, publicly and privately, slavery is a deprivation of the natural rights of persons held enslaved, and is an evil or wrong. What they were to do about that wrong is a different question. And many of them had lots of rationalizations about why abolition wasn't a good idea. But in terms of the abstract principle, they acknowledged that slavery was a violation of natural rights, and was that therefore unjust and evil. In any case, this progressive, radical approach to our American history tends to predominate among credentialed historians today in universities and, as a result, in our public schools. Now, although the titles of the textbook you'll find, American Pageant, America's Great, tend to suggest a kind of celebration of the United States. The content, of course, the textbooks are there, the titles are there for the school boards and for the parents. But the content tells something a different story. I can, during the question and answer period, elaborate on some of the most common things you'll find in the textbooks that are either misleading or, frankly, just false. And they're included, some of them are included in that, in the handout that you have on the sheet there about some things to look for in your textbook. But the political implications of these two approaches is pretty obvious. If in fact the positive aspects of the American founding, the only ones we can found on earth, represent the repudiation of the past, and if in fact the positive aspects of American progress themselves represent radical breaks and repudiation of the American founding, well, it's very obvious what we need today. We need today, again, not a new birth of freedom, but the birth of the old freedom. America does not need renewal or transformation. Far too much about the ways in which Declaration of Independence inspired progress going forward. Because the average American is going to say, well, that's a good thing. But you have to tweak the truth a little bit. To get the people riled up against those conservatives in Texas. The truth isn't helpful if you're undertaking a process of trying to convince a still too conservative, still too patriotic American people to go along with your political project. I hope that there's a lot more to talk about 5 hours and all these things. And I would be very, very much happy to receive questions, both during the formal question and answer period and then afterwards on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you, David. These subjects are so deep, and asking these folks to speak for just 15 minutes is almost painful for them. I understand, because these subjects are so important. We're doing this, we're going to do this by cards, and we're going to have a gentleman in the back by the name of Ben Boychuk, who's associated with Claremont Institute, Heartland Institute, as the editor of a wonderful newspaper called School Reform News, and he'll quickly shuffle through these and pick the best questions. So just, does anybody on the panel have a question for anybody else? I mean, it's fine if you don't, if you just want to go right to the audience Q&A. The theme here is quite apparent. I mean, you see what we're all up against. Because each of the speakers spoke from a different angle about the same thing. Okay, this is to Robert Spencer. Thank you. Bills to prevent hate speech would undermine free speech and support expansion of Islam. Please comment. Oh no, excuse me. How would bills to prevent hate speech?
Well, hate speech, is this thing on? Yes.
Yes.
I'm not sure it matters. It's not that big a room. But anyway, hate speech is in the eye of the beholder. Anyone who is in power can label his opposition hate if he can get away with it and use that law, use that rubric to silence him. This is the avowed agenda behind hate speech laws. The Organization of the Islamic Conference, which is 56 Islamic states plus the Palestinian Authority around the world, and is the largest voting bloc at the United Nations today, has been for years now working on the UN to try to compel the UN to adopt a binding resolution against hate speech, against vilification of religions. The only religion mentioned in the content of the bill is, of course, Islam. And the vilification, who would judge what constitutes vilification, is not specified, but one thing is specifically mentioned, and that is anti-terrorism efforts that look at the texts and teachings of Islam to try to understand the motivations of jihad terrorists. So in other words, hate speech laws, as envisioned by the OIC, would render us mute and unable to study what it is that the jihadis are trying to do and what their motives and goals are. It would be illegal to do that. And they have actually succeeded in getting non-binding resolutions passed by the UN every year for about 5 or 6 years now, and are working on a binding resolution. The Bush administration was a bulwark against that, and so actually has been the Obama administration, with one notable exception. It unaccountably, the Obama representatives at the UN in the summer of '09 co-sponsored with Egypt a non-binding resolution calling for member states to criminalize religious hatred, and containing a caveat that said states that have something like the First Amendment obviously are excused, but grudgingly. And so this was the first time that an American administration went on record as essentially opposing an amendment to the Constitution and saying that we really wish this weren't here, this pesky First Amendment. And with so many anti-free speech and anti-First Amendment spokesmen in the Obama administration, if you're not aware of that, pick up the Post-American Presidency, you'll get all their names, except for the latest, of course, because there keep on being more. It's a matter of great concern that our free speech is at risk, and that is the only thing that prevents a tyrannical government from absolutely exerting its will over the people.
Okay, thank you. This one's for Lance. It says, can a California proposition outlaw the terms of the union agreements, and then in parentheses, assuming union owns the legislature? I will say that they do. Would a ballot measure to aggregate union contracts pass legal muster, assuming it could pass the electorate?
Well, certain other things could. You could, limit certain of the things that I mentioned. I do think that I think when you hear about these provisions that I mentioned in the union contract, I think the immediate response of many of us is to say, well, that sounds really wrong. We need to have the legislature or somebody, do something about that and, ban them, bar them, limit them from being implemented. I think, however, that the better way to do it is to, give people more choice, right? Okay, if the unions want to do that in let's say the Chaffee district or the LA Unified district, they want to, or the California Federation of Teachers wants to limit these. Have provisions limiting the use of technology in the classroom, all right? The best thing is to give somebody who has a child in that classroom an exit ticket, all right? That's the much better way than to somehow, jerry-rig a system that somehow corrects the union contract. Because there's always going to be real difficulty in trying to do that, because it's a top-down solution. You're going to have to be, know how all the holes are going to develop, all these kinds of things. It's much simpler to say, as in the introduction that was made by Larry about my film, Sweden's Choice. What the Swedes did was in the early 1990s, they gave everybody in the entire country, regardless of income, regardless of where they live, a voucher, all right? I know no one wants to use the V word anymore, okay? But here you have a country that we've all basically associated with socialism, right? Sweden. And yet, when it comes to their education system, they're probably one of the most market-oriented countries in the entire world. Every Swede has a voucher or scholarship, whatever you want to call it, attached to their child, which they can use to send to any school in the country, whether it's public, private independent, private religious, whatever it is, the Swedes can send their kid to that. Well, what's happened? It's forced the unions and the public school system to respond to the consumers. So, the consumers don't like something, well, they go and find a school that doesn't do the things that they want. In this film, I talked to the governor of Stockholm, who was also the former minister of education in the country when that law was passed. And I asked him, well, what has been the outcome of this? He said that what happened is that headmasters in these public schools have found out that, well, now that the customer base can leave, they look at what the other guy is doing in the private sector and say, well, if they can do it, we got to try and do it, and we got to try and do it better. I asked them what the unions did, and they did the same thing, is that they now have to be responsive to the parents and the children and their needs. And so I think that's a much better way to do it than try and create the perfect union contract through government action.
Just a reminder that Mary is still with us, and we'll take questions if any of you have any specific questions for her. The next question is to David. It says, return to more parental control, question mark. How do we do this? The local school has little or no taxing authority. The parents are disconnected, even remote from school administration. Great idea, but wouldn't it take a revolution to succeed?
This is my armchair, really. I'm not an expert in California politics. But it strikes me that the following two factors have to be taken into consideration. One is that, at least based on the results of the last election, that anything that is even remotely associated with the Republican Party is a loser statewide if it's associated with the partisan label. I was just stunned in the last election, following the polls going up to it, how much the Republican wave nationally seemed to crash on the Rocky Mountains. It's like it didn't even happen here. You had great candidates, lots of money, Fiorina and Whitman, and they lost by the usual margins. And one was pro-choice, one wasn't. You think that's kind of no, it doesn't matter. So on the one hand, the problem politically for any kind of conservative approach, if it is a statewide Republican type thing, it's got major handicaps. Conversely, however, the ongoing fiscal crisis, and it's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets better, is going to give Sacramento an increasingly bad name. So one thing I was thinking, in terms of using the initiative process, the goal of the initiative process might be, if you can get the vouchers, that's great, but that's politically toxic, is get as much control through a constitutional initiative at the local level. Because if you multiply the centers of power, you make it more possible for, at least in some places, for people to make positive changes. You make it, if everything's concentrated on a statewide basis, that's an area where ordinary citizens are going to be really weak vis-a-vis teachers' unions. But they've got much more a fighting chance if each school district has more power over textbooks, more power over the degree to which they let charter schools in, etc. So more parental control, apart from the voucher issue, just decentralization. And that's politically a possibility, it seems to me, because if you say Sacramento's a bad thing, people are going to respond, well, yes, of course Sacramento's a bad thing. That is something that that's an argument that can be made, and localism is an argument that can be made in a way that isn't necessarily going to be a Republican argument.
Thank you. Next question is to Mary. You can hear Mary, yes?
Maybe?
The next question is for you. Can you hear me reading?
Not that well, but...
Okay. All right, how about now? Okay. This one's from Mary. It says, a recent poll showed 40% of 18 to 29-year-olds did not know which country we won independence from. Do you believe this is a result of political conformity to special interest groups?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard of that poll, and but when I attended the National Council for the Social Studies Conference in late 2009, I was just appalled. The teachers were talking about slipping in lessons on social justice and making students into change agents in their workshops. They had absolutely no concern for having students learn facts about history. Here in Atlanta, when we have the testing scandal, because the Atlanta Public Schools, there's an investigation going on about cheating by teachers and administrators on their year-end tests. But this one education professor from Clayton State University wrote an editorial, and she said, why should students even know the dates of the Civil War? This is an education professor. So that attitude is rampant in education schools who, and the professors who think that students should be creative learners rather than learn facts.
Boo!
I think we all agree with you on that one, Mel. Thanks.
Can I chime in on that just very briefly?
Sure.
I did one thing I mentioned in the handout, and I just want to emphasize it right now, is primary sources, primary sources, primary sources, particularly in the high school level. Islam. Read the Quran. Read parts of it, and read in excerpted form. Similarly, with respect to American history. They're going to quote something like Jefferson's Wall of Separation. Give them the entire exchange between the Danbury Baptist Convention and Thomas Jefferson to see what the founders had to say about the relation between religion and public life. It doesn't, and the value of primary sources is twofold. First of all, they're actually reading the stuff rather than having it being filtered through textbooks. And secondly, it undermines some of their agenda, because if they're going to teach the actual Quran, well, then they have to wrestle with the actual text and the problems that are there, rather than the Gandhi-like version.
Just a real quick anecdote. Mary mentioned the Civil War and the dates and that sort of thing. A friend of mine told me this story about, it supposedly happened up in Northern California, where a parent actually went to a school, elementary school, because he was dissatisfied with the fact that the textbook on history that his child was using actually devoted only 2 pages to the Civil War. And so he went to the school, tried to find somebody there to talk to about this, and asked for an explanation. Found a teacher who then he asked, well, why is they're giving short shrift to the American Civil War? He says, oh, don't worry, we supplement that. And he said, really? How do you supplement that? Well, we invite veterans of the Civil War in to talk to the kids. The parent said, you invite veterans of the U.S. Civil War into the classroom? And the teacher said, oh yeah, it's always better to get the first-hand story to the kids rather than having them read the textbook. And parent turned around and walked away.
Thank you for the laugh. I think we needed it. Okay, this is being addressed to all, so whoever has their hand up first will get the answer. Since it's hard to get schools to change their textbooks, why not provide supplementary materials as handouts and websites? Can that be effective in neutralizing the errors in the textbooks and teaching students to have a healthy skepticism about what they read?
You have to get them to use it. They won't use it. We can make all the materials that we want, but they're not going to use it in the system as it is. The system as it is absolutely corrupt. And so certainly we need to develop alternative sources of education for our children, certainly. But that also includes the schools themselves.
Well, I agree with what Robert says. I think that when you think that again that okay, the textbooks right now are not as good as they should be. Shouldn't we have better books and maybe we can use supplements and that sort of thing? Well, you got to think about, well, who approves the supplements, right? Who's going to let those supplements into the schools, right? It's going to be the same system that is approving the really bad stuff, right? So what are the chances they're going to approve the really good stuff, to come into class, to balance out the bad stuff? Well, nil. And so, again, I have to go back to, like a broken record, is that, the only way that the system will listen to you is if you can leave the system for someplace better. And so then, when people are leaving, because the stuff that they're putting into the kids' hands is a load of what, then they're going to have to then think twice about whether it's worthwhile, because they're losing their per pupil funding because they're leaving. So, and I agree with what David was saying about localism, but localism is important only when you also have competition, right? I mean, again, you bring down stuff down to the local level. It is easier for kids, for people to then have control over issues. But unless there's some opportunity for people to get out of this corrupt monopolistic system, you know, then you're going to hit a dead end.
And I want to add, I agree in the absolute importance of competition, and that would be a really significant improvement for the plight of children and parents. Perhaps there is a little bit of intermediate thing you can do in the current system, because this current system is corrupt partly because teachers are lazy. So the degree to which you can provide them with lesson plans, some teachers, probably something more on a teacher-by-teacher basis, but the degree to which you present yourself and say, look, I'd like to be able to present something cheaper, easy for you to use. The art would be involved in presenting it in a way where it alleviates the teacher of work. If you can do that, then maybe it can be introduced. Because not all public school teachers are consciously involved in the radical project. But those that control the textbook publications, those that control the curriculum are. But a lot of them, they just take the book and whatever, teach it, that's fine. But if they can find something easier to use, a path of least resistance, then maybe there's a way to get it in. It's not a particularly great remedy to the problem, but it maybe helps a little bit.
Yeah, that's a very good point you made there, that so many of these decisions come from the top. And most, for example, just let me say, so most people think that most teachers are lefties. Maybe more so in Los Angeles. Teachers tend politically to mimic the population they live in. Los Angeles is very liberal. Teachers tend to be very liberal. You go up to the farming areas, not so. But the leaders of the unions, the people who write the textbooks, tend to be on the left. I'm being kind. This question is for Robert, and although I think anybody else, other people might certainly want to chime in. When graduates do learn that schools lie to them, doesn't this devalue all they learned and cause resentment against society that lied to them?
One would think. However, the indoctrination is rather thorough and constant. And even though there has been a marked uptick, as I said in the talk, in jihad plots in the United States over the last few years, every time that one happens, the mainstream media focuses immediately on the fears in the Muslim community of vigilante attacks against them. And so every time they attack us, they become the victim. And this just reinforces the kinds of things that is in those textbooks, that this is these people are gentle, wise, and victimized, and brown. And they are victimized by evil white people who are xenophobic, racist, ignorant, and hateful. And as long as this is the play that plays out, this is the story that plays out, every time one of these things happens, then there's really nothing going to challenge the lies that they've been taught in school.
Real quickly, I just want to also add to that, I mean, one of the places that we need to look, because we're talking about the problems in the education system. We're talking about the problems in the classroom and with, at least some of our teachers. But where do some of these bad practices come from? A lot of them come from the schools of education that are producing the teachers. Okay? You look at, I did a study for Pacific Research Institute a number of years ago that actually looked at the curriculum of teacher training programs in the schools of education, right? And one of the things that you found is that in most of the CSU campuses, for example, that produce the majority of teachers here in California, multiculturalism was a very important part of the teacher training program. Now, a lot of teachers will tell you after they graduate from these training programs that what they were taught was a bunch of BS and didn't help them at all once they got into the classroom. But nevertheless, that's what they're taught. And so, and it does stick with some of them. And so, study you can look on our website called Facing the Classroom Challenge, and it looks at these schools of education and the kinds of things that teachers are indoctrinated with in a very ideological way, along the lines of what Robert and also what David has said tonight.
If every school of education were shut down tomorrow, this country would be a better place. Okay, Lance, this is for you. You've just been given a job as governor. How would you tackle the union resistance to change? What steps would you take? Risks, expected outcome.
Well, I mean, if I were governor, that'd be a scary thing, wouldn't it? Actually, no. I mean, the thing is, it'd be one thing to be governor versus one thing to be emperor, right? Okay. If you were emperor, you could do some things. I mean, like right now, if I were governor, sure, I could do what Jerry Brown just did. Totally throw out the entire State Board of Education, appoint, 7 members of my own liking, every one of them who's a pro-school choice advocate, but I still have the Democratic legislature to deal with, right? I mean, if I think that, a choice system a la Sweden, some of these other countries that have really tried it, Canada, for example, which has a very interesting choice system in many of the provinces like Alberta and British Columbia. In fact, Canada has no federal Department of Education. Isn't that amazing? Again, there's no Minister of Education, there's no Canadian Department of Education. No, it's all done on the provincial level in Canada.
I've got to go start packing. I'm moving.
So, anyway, but no, I think you could do all of those things, right? But I think that you are still hamstrung by the fact that you have a legislature that you'd have to deal with. I do think, though, that what's important is to use the governor's office as a bully pulpit to tell people the true story, right? Now, how many people knew about some of these statistics we talked about earlier today about how bad things are in the middle class and affluent areas? Probably no one. How many people know what's in their local union contract, right? Probably no one, right? So the thing of it is that until people understand the extent of the problem, and that's one of the great things about Ronald Reagan's administration. He didn't get everything he wanted, right? He appointed people like Bill Bennett, but people like that as Secretary of Education. But what Reagan did was he used the presidency as a bully pulpit to be able to talk to people about these issues of freedom that then made a difference down the line. All right? It's not like you were going to get a national voucher system under Ronald Reagan, but he laid the groundwork for that, allow that discussion to become legitimate. All right? And he was not afraid to, tell the truth. And he did it in a way that was accessible to the average person. As a speechwriter, and working in the Reagan administration, that was the thing that I thought was most important, is that not just that we had the correct arguments, we had to be able to put it in a way that the average person both understood and hit home with them to their essential core of who they are as Americans. And I think that, the Reagan administration did that in many ways. And I think that, unfortunately, in succeeding, Republican administrations or with, various elected officers, that's been lost. And I think that until we get back to that and are unafraid to speak the truth, but at the level that people can relate to, then we're going to have real problems.
Mary, this one's for you. There?
Okay. I'm here.
Okay, and before you answer, you might have to give a brief explanation because not everybody might be aware of this. It says, Mary, what is your take on the New South's edited edition of Huck Finn?
Okay. Well, the new edition has replaced the word with slave because it was determined to be too offensive. I think it's an atrocious thing to do. I mean, there are so many works of literature that use that word, and they use it as part of the sensitivity on the part of academics and censors who want to make a name for themselves, and it's going to kill literature. It's going to kill it even. I mean, it's already studied literature is dying, and it's you know, going to be the final stake, I think. You know, once you start doing this. So.
Okay, well, thank you.
In the next edition, Jim will be an imam, and Tom and Huck will convert to Islam and bring peace to the Mississippi River.
On that note, Robert, next question is for you. It says, is there a counterpart to CIE systematically trying to vet textbooks and ensure truthful treatment of Islam?
No. There ought to be, but there isn't. Start one.
Okay, somebody just says, please comment on Michelle Rhee's piece in Wall Street Journal today. I don't know if anybody here is I've been too busy with this. I haven't read the journal yet today. Anybody read it?
Yes. What's it?
Okay, well, I mean, since nobody has. Well, no, but do you want to?
Tell us about it.
I was just going to say that it's about empowering, her new organization is to empower students over teachers and make educational policy commensurate with that.
Okay, Doris, do we have time for more questions, or one more? Okay. Okay. It's a general question for everybody. Isn't it time to audit the school systems and take away and control the money?
Yep.
Well, I mean, well, yes. You know, I mean, as Robert says, I mean, the thing of it is that I wrote a piece, for example, a few months ago for the Los Angeles Daily News, just talking about Los Angeles Unified and all the tens of millions of dollars that they've lost, right? It's not that it went to someplace that didn't, you know, improve student performance like they thought it was supposed to do. They simply lost the money, right? They paid people who were no longer employed by the district, you know, they did, I mean, that kind of stuff, right? Now, you can do that, and you can find that money, and then, you know, there are headlines in the LA Times, perhaps. Maybe there's an investigation. Some people might, you know, might be fired, go to jail, who knows, right? But the point of it is that at the end of that, who still controls the money, right? The state government, the school district, they all still control the money. So, you know, you can put in, like, you know, what appears to be some oversight, you know, board or committee or something like that. But, you know, when you've got basically that same system trying to police itself, you're never going to get real reform based upon that. And, you know, again, you know, until you know, give somebody else the power over the money, namely parents and their kids, then, you know, that kind of abuse is going to continue to happen.
Okay, thank you. All right, let me just wrap up here. Thank you all for your questions. Anyway, I'm just going to take this last question here, which says, everything is so gloomy, can we actually do anything to force positive changes other than being aware of the problems? And the answer is yes. And everybody got a handout tonight with just some prescriptions from our four panelists. Doing nothing really is not an option. I know a lot of people in this room, and I know you're here because, obviously because you care. This was not a fun event, per se. It would have been much easier for a lot of people just to sit home and have a martini and watch TV. But the fact that you're here says that you do care. So doing nothing is not an option. You have suggested ways of doing things. You have everyone here on the panel's contact information. Please don't get discouraged. All the usual suspects do not want change. Teachers unions, school boards, Sacramento bureaucrats. Every one of those groups is benefiting from the status quo. And please note that none of the beneficiaries I mentioned are children. They are not benefiting from the status quo. And if education isn't about children, what is it about? Money. Yeah. I would suggest also, if you're going to take any kind of action, try to get people to do it with you. Obviously, a group can create change more than an individual. Also, just something that I'm marginally involved with is National School Choice Week. Just talk about it a little bit. If we have school choice, schools get better. Private schools get better. Public schools respond and become better. Because it's amazing, even in education, competition works. So National School Choice Week is the 23rd to the 29th. There are a lot of events, and I'll just say, please, if you want to learn more, go to schoolchoiceweek.com. I want to thank our erudite panel. On the phone.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
And once again, Doris and Mike Finch and the David Green.